Hello again, everybody. This is Samu here, hosting this week for My Taste is Better Than Yours. And as you can see by the title, we're back talking about Bleach, my favorite series. And I'm continuing the journey of getting Enzo through Bleach. If anything, I feel like I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, let's see if I can get Enzo caught up by the final core of the anime. So this is the task, and this time we're talking about the Lost Asian arc. So thank you, Enzo, for reading it. Yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, my thoughts are it should have been called the Fullbring arc, but you told me that a lot of people think that, so I'm glad to know that my views are not. I'm not an island with that one. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast to earlier arcs in some ways, while still quite consistent with them in others. Let's put it that way.
Okay, well, let's dive into that. This arc did come out between the years of 2011 and 2012. It follows after Ichigo defeated Sosuke Aizen, and as happened at the end of the Arrancar saga, he lost his powers. That was how he defeated him, and now he isn't able to sense spiritual power. He doesn't have that awareness anymore, something that he had even before he became a substitute shinigami. So yeah, he's now 17. He's having to figure out what he's going to do with his life. But things happen. Uryu is attacked by a mysterious enemy quite early in this arc, and it sets Ichigo on the path of trying to regain those powers that had been lost to him. And in doing so, like you said, the Fullbringers come in, this group called Execution. So this all folds together in this arc of Ichigo getting his powers back, which I think was definitely the expectation on seeing them be lost. I think you even commented on that last time, Enzo, that you were like, okay, I expect one of the next plot points is going to be how does Ichigo get back to that point?
Indeed.
Um, what I wanted to kick off before we go into specifics of the arc is the context of it. I had said before, Enzo, I was very curious to hear your perspective on this arc. I think fair to say, like you touched on, it's quite different in a lot of ways from what makes Bleach Bleach, what people maybe expect from the series. I'm curious how much you know about the arc in situ of the series as a whole, what the reception of it is, if you were to put on your like analytical guessing hat of how you think this sits within like the fan base of Bleach as a whole.
Okay. I don't know. I don't have any inside information on this. But I would guess probably something like Heaven's Arena in a Hunter x Hunter context. Like generally pretty well liked, but not included on too many lists as being like the my favorite kind of a thing. Uh, sort of considered to be I mean, this is just strictly me spitballing here, but I that's what I would guess is like considered to be a good, solid, not spectacular, not as probably weighty and substantial as many of the arcs in the series to in the eyes of many fans. Am I close?
Uh, kind of. You were in the right direction, sort of. But if I was to be blunt, I would say this arc is the beginning of the end of Bleach, as it's considered a pillar in Weekly Shonen Jump. I think this was the beginning of the end of its highs in sales, and I think this was a drop-off point for a lot of casual fans as well. At the time it came out, it was very disliked. Actually, I think it was there was a mixture of expectations not being met of those who had been ongoing with the series for a long time, those who felt that they weren't getting the characters that they wanted from the series, they weren't getting the focus of what they wanted, not maybe buying into this vision that Kubo had for it. I have a lot of thoughts about it, which we will get into, but yeah, this was, I think, the first the first point where it was like, oh wait, Bleach is no longer considered a superpower because yeah, it didn't land with I would say even
Interesting.
majority of people who are reading it.
That surprises me,
Um,
actually.
yeah, you will see a lot. I think people who say this is either their favorite arc or their least favorite arc,
Interesting.
and I think that is maybe indicative of what parts of what makes Bleach Bleach is what stands out to them. I also do think that it is another case of reading it weekly, ongoing, where it's a different experience than being able to binge it and also being to look at it retroactively and seeing, as you have touched on, I think yet again there is an architectural layering of everything here. And Kubo intentionally, I think, keeps the reader at a distance for so long, but I think his confidence in knowing what revelations and how everything was going to come together wasn't apparent to people who were reading it as it came out. So I think it is also a case of one of those arcs that gets more affection the further people are from having first experienced it.
Okay.
So yeah, one question I want to ask you is, do you feel like, because in many ways this is a shift in terms of tone, in terms of focus of the series, do you think Kubo himself was fatigued by him being in this Arrancar mode, that he as like a creator, as a writer, felt that, okay, I need to do something, even if this isn't maybe going to land, I need to do something that I want to do because
Yeah.
this seems like the most interesting direction for me.
Well, far be it for me to try to get inside any mangaka's head. And Kubo, frankly, seems like kind of a weird guy. So it might be scary in there, but um, I kind of do get that vibe because as a reader, I have Arrancar fatigue, frankly. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like if I'd had to write the damn thing. Um, I am of the opinion, if I'm brutally honest, that Arrancar is too long. I like its ambition. I feel, though, as if there were things that I think it could have been done equally or better in 160 chapters, say. There is an element in this where you do kind of feel like, all right, I'm going to bite off something I can chew here. I'm going to do something with a narrower focus, a narrower scope, narrower goals, and something I can, basically I can write it for a year or whatever it was, and then I'm done. And it feels, in a sense, that, and also as if it might be a bit of a transitional arc, like, okay, we're taking the story from one point and this is something that's crucial to get it to the next point. But it's that as much as it is what happens within the arc itself. And as we've talked about, I am always of the opinion that he is the architect. I don't think he's the gardener. I do think he has a very, very clear vision of what he has in mind in the big picture right from the very beginning. So I feel like, he's like, okay, this is where I need to get to. I could do it in 55 chapters. I could do it in 62 chapters. I could do it in 150 chapters. Let's do something more manageable this time. Let's tell something that's a little more concise. I do think there might have been some intelligent design behind that.
Yeah, and I don't. It's intelligent design. Yeah, I agree with that. I also, without like diminishing people's opinions when they don't like this, I there is a part of me which is, if until you understand the full picture, it's hard to see the vision, I suppose. So maybe Kubo's error was in not selling it strong enough when it was ongoing, where this basically was a mystery arc like the entire time, the absence of what we knew, and then much less focus on fights that we had. We didn't see the shinigami, the characters that are like Bleach in so many ways to a lot of fans. It felt like, okay, you're focusing on the quote unquote main cast, but people have made it evident that that's not really what everyone wants to see. So I think he set himself up in a way that was ambitious, and I think necessary for him. He needed to tell this story, but it is unfortunate, I suppose, that this is the first stain in like the reputation of the series as a whole, and it didn't land in the way he intended.
Huh.
Clearly,
Interesting. I had no idea. No idea.
yeah. I think you mentioned Heaven's Arena. I think structurally it's quite similar actually to the election arc after Chimera Ant, which is a massive, massive, big idea arc, which then bleeds into this shorter transitional stage of the story. So I think this is his election arc in some way, though I think fair to say people still do hold the election arc in pretty high regard as well in the context of the full Hunter x Hunter series. I'll start from the beginning then. So the Ichigo has lost his powers. We're back to him at school. There's a reset of the status quo. I do feel like intentionally this is also a mirror of the first arc, in the same way that we discussed how you felt Arrancar was intentionally a mirror of Soul Society. So it does feel like almost we're in an onion where like as we get further from that first arc, he wanted to re-examine like, okay, what if the series started again? Like how would I approach that? I think that's a pretty interesting approach that he's taken in that regard. And especially as we talked about it more before, I do agree that mirroring narratively what he's done before is like a key component of what tickles him as a writer. So I don't know, did you get the sense that we were still getting a mirroring of previous arcs here?
No, not in the same way I did with Arrancar and the Shinigami arc. I felt like this was sort of a. There are, as you say, far fewer fights in this arc. There are fights, but there aren't nearly as many. Which, frankly, I think is a change for the better. After Arrancar, I was combat fatigued. Um, I felt like it was an intentional dissonance with earlier arcs. I felt like it was something. Whereas I felt like with Arrancar, he was intentionally like doing like a photo negative mirror image of the Shinigami arc. I felt like here he was like intentionally just saying, okay, I'm going to do something very different, much more low key, with more talking, more dialogue, and fewer characters, fewer fights, and less obviously globally significant stakes. I mean, basically with the Shinigami arc, it's like, okay, we're going to save the world. You don't really have that save the world vibe in Fullbring. It's something sort of different from that. So I guess that's a long way of saying no. I don't think I got that impression that he was mirroring anything. I felt like he was intentionally doing the opposite.
Okay, fair. I mean, I think it does. The genre shift as well is very different from what we've had previously in the series. This eventually does become a psychological thriller. As I said, there's a big component of the mystery going on here. It feels much more raw, and the stakes feel very personal. And I think more than any of the arcs before, this is Ichigo's story. This is Ichigo's arc. It's about him facing the reality of A, not having his powers, but also then B, in relation to that, how he manages this feeling of not being in control, of being able to save the day, being the one to like be the hero, take action on things that he feels is an injustice. He's so used to putting that upon himself and that being a part of his identity. I think this is of more than what has come before. This was an examination of his character, how he's feeling in this mental state, and how he's exploited in that state as well. So I would say for me, this was also the arc that cemented a lot of my appreciation for Ichigo's journey as a character. I think there's a lot more. I feel like the storytelling here is more mature and like the direction we're going with him, as opposed to some of the things that have come before, which maybe feel more archetypical of a battle shonen. I've always enjoyed him. I always think he's a strong representative of the series as its main character. But I think in understanding the full scope of where he gets from beginning to the end of the series, I think this is so necessary for him. But I think it adds, I think, a lot to him. I know in the past we've discussed that Ichigo was never been your favorite character. I know he's kind of maybe in the middle for you. Correct me if I'm wrong. I wonder, did you feel more? Did you feel any different about that in this arc? Did you get a better sense of Ichigo?
Well, yeah, I think so, in the sense that the stakes are more personal. It's not the Save the World arc; it's the Save Ichigo arc, in a sense, because he's trying to get his powers back. What the difference? The main difference here is that he's more vulnerable, because not only is he literally vulnerable in that he does not have what is effectively a superpower now, but he's also emotionally vulnerable because that makes him feel inadequate, and he has anxiety disorder over not being able to protect people, which is sort of the mode. What I think it's important to remember about him is that it's like, even before this whole Shinigami thing happened in the beginning, with Rukia and all that, he was kind of the protector type anyway. That was always like in his personality. He was, like two little sisters, and he was a tough guy, but he wasn't like a tough guy in the Bancho sense. He wasn't like, being a vandal and all that stuff. He was a tough guy, and he's like, I'm sure wouldn't have occurred to him this way, but it's like, I'm going to use my powers for good, kind of a thing. So he was like, he got off on protecting people. That was how he kind of identified himself, and that went away from him. They took that away from him, and so yes, I think that in taking that away from him, Kubo did make him more appealing and more interesting as a character, because it made him more vulnerable. I wouldn't say that it goes on to make him like, I'm not putting him on a Kenshin plateau or anything as being like an engaging character with what I consider to be a really riveting personal story, but I do think it's easier to identify with him in this arc because of the places his struggles take him. I mean, any character can become more relatable when you see them struggling with things that like you would struggle with. And while obviously the circumstances are fantastical here, the basic underlying emotional side of it is pretty universal, I would say.
I think the absence of not knowing anything that's happening around him, while knowing that so much is, just feeds into this lack of purpose that he has for himself. I think he's a character who doesn't express often what he's really feeling emotionally.
I would agree with that. Agree with that.
He acts and he does, and you can tell that he's driven by something, but he's not like a Naruto. Naruto, very famously, one of the critiques of the series is that Naruto performs talk no jutsu with his opponents, which I don't think is as big of a critique as people say it. But you can probably imagine he wants to understand his enemies, and there'll be big speeches and dialogue and getting to the bottom in that way. Ichigo is not really interested in that, and he's sort of the person, even at this age, where you're like, damn, you could use some therapy. So I think having this in this state where he is being exploited makes for, I think, one of the most gripping parts of his character journey thus far.
He also sulks when he doesn't lash out. He sulks. He internalizes and gets quiet. So that's also, I think, kind of an interesting element of his character.
Yeah, and I think this trope, this word has like a very negative connotation with it, but then there's miscommunication, where something is not being said out loud that could bridge the gap between characters. That can be quite irritating, I think, as a reader. And I think that might actually be part of the reason why people were annoyed by the arc as it was going on. It was like, Ichigo, why don't you just talk to Uryu? Ichigo, why don't you just talk to Orihime? These people are here. They will hear you out. You will get more to the bottom of what's happening. But I think, yeah, it never irritated me in that way. It felt true to someone going through the things that he was going through. So much of this arc he spends physically running away from what is trying to chase him down. So it makes sense that he also runs from the people that are closest to him, which is something which actually he has to do and confront as well, which I'll talk about a bit more later. Segue then. It's not called the Fullbring arc, but there are Fullbringers, and they are at the center of everything that's happening here. This is a new group of characters, a whole new concept in the series. These people they're humans and they can manipulate the soul and everything, as it turns out, even items and every aspect of life has a soul, not just people. Yeah, it's an eclectic bunch. They all have powers which tie to something which is physical, which relates to their identity, their personality. It almost is like JoJo esque in a way, sometimes I feel. Yeah, I can see different influence of what he got from this group. I think maybe the characters didn't resonate compared to the Espada, compared to the captains of the Shinigami. But I do think there are a few standout characters here. I find Ruruka quite charming. I think tsunderes are not often my favorite trope of a character, but you can, I think, get the sense of that this is a good person at the core. And especially when you see scenes with her and Orihime together, the purity of Orihime's actions and how she speaks versus how Ruruka struggles with understanding why she is that way and not being that herself. That's one of my favorite little side dynamics of this arc. Ginjo, I have a lot to discuss on, which we'll get to the end of this episode, I think. But Tsukishima as well, I think he comes on the scene in a bold way, and I think his power book of the end, in particular, is probably the most creative of all of these Fullbring concepts. So yeah, your thoughts on the Fullbringers as a group, as like a concept, and any standouts for you?
An interesting group. It fits with the arc. They're not as flashy or as obviously charismatic as the characters we met in the last couple of arcs. I mean, the captains and even the Espada, they were more physically kind of splashy, bigger personalities for the most part. This Fullbring group, for the most part, were kind of surly, is a word I would use to describe them. It's like they were kind of like had the whole social outcast vibe going on, and for we obviously learn things in the end of the arc that frame it in a slightly different way, but you do definitely get the sense that these were like people who felt like fate had shit on them and were kind of pissed off about it. So it's like, maybe this is the right group of people for Strawberry to have a run in with when he's kind of at his low ebb himself, where he's kind of feeling a little bit self pitying about, losing his powers and not being able to sense what's going on and not being able to protect the people he wants to protect. And this group, I did quite like Ginjo, actually. I thought he was interesting. I was not surprised per se by the way his story played out. There were reveals that didn't surprise me when they happened, but I was nevertheless kind of interested in him. Um, and he kind of struck me as being a sort of a tragic character in the same way maybe Coyote was from the last arc. It's like someone who's really kind of caught up in their circumstances more than in the act of doing something they shouldn't be doing. So, yeah, I felt a lot of I felt like a lot of empathy for these people actually, because I was like, well, this isn't going to end well for most of them probably. They're not. They don't have that kind of immediate, curb appeal. They're not Lamborghinis, but they're interesting. They're an interesting group. I think Ginjo is the most interesting among them, but I think he should be because he's the most important.
Yeah, there is definitely, like you say, a dour note to the whole experience of being with them. That's tied to this fact that they all want to get rid of their powers. They're kind of cursed with them, and how Ichigo like plays into this. Like he's taken in, and this can be his way to substitute that with his returning Soul Reaper powers. So, um, yeah, definitely there is like an aura of negativity. We do find that Chad is also a part of this group, it turns out. And we finally have a name for what his ability is. He's kind of always, him and Orihime have always been outliers in the conventions of the powers within Bleach, they're humans who have these abilities that don't fall into the line of being hollows, being shinigami, being visored. So retroactively, we're getting this explanation that Chad is a Fullbringer. It's never said as well in the series, but it has been pretty much confirmed in like comments from Kubo that Orihime is one as well. Because they do draw from something of importance to them. Orihime has her hairpins that her brother gave her, and Chad, we find out, is down to his skin color. That's the thing that inspires him. So, one thing I was going to mention was in the build up to this arc originally before it was published, Kubo made a comment this was going to be quote unquote Chad's arc, maybe in a similar way that like Soul Society was Rukia's arc, that Arrancar was Orihime's arc. Now it's funny because you could say that, you could make that comparison quite easily, but there is almost like a in that being your arc within Bleach, you're almost put within this passive space where everyone works around you. So it's not shocking to me that that kind of also is what happened with Chad. I think a lot of people from that comment had expectations that like, oh wait, this is when Chad actually like becomes a prominent character again. Did you obviously weren't aware of this, but I did
No.
send you that note. So I don't know what you felt of his place in this story. Do you think, knowing that, would that have been disappointing, or do you think there was still enough here that fit within the overall story Kubo was trying to tell?
I think there was enough to fit. I do think if I had heard Kubo say it was his arc, there would have come a point where it was like, wait, is that it? Because he is, probably the sixth or seventh most prominent character in the arc in terms of screen time. So he's very important, but he certainly isn't the main character. I think he plays less. Another, I like, for example, I think that Orihime is more prominent in the Arrancar arc than Chad is in this arc, I would say. Um, so, but then again, if you want to call Rukia the Rukia arc, if you want to call Soul Society, I mean, for most of that arc, she's in a cell. So, I mean, so she's very passive. Orihime is more active in Arrancar, and Chad is more active here. But if I had gone into this under some kind of a model where this is his arc, quote unquote, I might very well have been disappointed by that if that's what I was hoping to see, because I didn't get the feeling like that he was like the central focus character for any extended periods of the action here.
No, I think we got some explanation of things that
Yeah,
get
we
a full
did.
picture of Chad, but yeah, he was never in a prominent role, so there definitely was difference in that regard. So up until this point in the arc as well, we're kind of with Ichigo. We don't really know the full story of these Fullbringers. They're, as you say, they're kind of in a negative vibe. It's hard to see where this is really going. Definitely, I do think that this leads into why a lot of people were falling off from it and didn't feel like it was the Bleach that they knew and loved. This does change in a very particular chapter, which is one of my favorites in the entire series, I have to say, which is 453. This is the one where Ichigo goes home after some training with the Fullbring group. Up until that point, there has been conflict between Tsukishima, like jumping on into the Fullbringers. They're fighting each other. Tsukishima is, at this point, he's the villain of the arc. He's working against Ichigo and the Fullbringers, who are, have their own separate goal. So he's been the antagonist. And then Ichigo gets home, and we find that Tsukishima is there. Not only that, but his sisters are like, "Oh, cousin Shu's here. Welcome back, Ichigo." We saw hints to this before, where Tsukishima had cut down a couple of people. He had injured. He'd cut through Orihime, but there was no injury left behind. She was feeling a bit strange and weird, and again, that wasn't fully explained until later in the arc. But we find that he's able to. His power is to insert himself in the memories of other people and alter that in the way that he wishes with his bookmark turned sword. So it's a mind-bending ability that when you imagine the scenario Ichigo is in, he gets home, everyone of his family, everyone of his friends knows and loves Cousin Sure, and Ichigo is going absolutely insane. If he tries to explain what's happening to any of them, he seems insane. Ginjo at this point is the only other person who's not been caught. It feels like everything is turning against him. He's being upended of getting his powers back. All of his friends are distant because he couldn't reach out to them, and he tried to do everything for himself yet again by going to this execution group. I think this is like where the arc shifts, and yeah, like I said, one of my favorite points of the series. So I'm curious if what you felt of this moment where we were starting to get more of the truth start revealing to us as the reader.
Yeah, it was an interesting twist. I would call it well, I guess I'm dating myself by saying it, but it kind of struck me as like the Twilight Zone chapter. But I guess that's culturally and chronologically limiting in saying that. I would also say it almost seemed to me that as if Kubo was presenting his ability as not so much being able to insert himself in people's memories, but like Tsukishima could almost, it was almost like it was a time manipulation more than a mind manipulation. Like he was like
Yeah, he changes the past.
literally inserting himself into their pasts, not into their memories, but literally inserting themselves into their past so that their current self has real memories of him being in there doing those things. Which I'm not sure how that would work, but it's kind of an interesting in that it's kind of a terrifyingly powerful ability if in fact that's what he can do. Orihime maybe had the most scary ability in the whole series in some ways, but his might actually be worse. It might even be scarier when you think about it. And so yeah, it was like one of these moments where the whole vibe of that chapter is we have to make you feel like we have to make you feel what Ichigo's feeling. You have to feel that same disorientation, that same confusion. Yeah, I think that was very interesting. It's not my absolute favorite chapter in the arc. That would be 458, but I do think it's a very interesting twist, and I think his ability is a very interesting ability. I'm not sure I understand it, but it's very interesting anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it is also this idea of manipulating the perception of the past within each person to have that inserted in everyone but one person. How, what would you even do in Ichigo's scenario? And I mean, you get to a point where it is Ichigo and Ginjo for a time where they're the only ones unaffected, and Ichigo, in his spiral of panic, says something which is so unlike him for the rest of the series that's come before it, which is if we kill him, will it reverse the power? And he genuinely considers like, oh, I will kill this person to fix this. He doesn't even know if that will be the case, but this person who is not a shinigami, not a spirit, not a monstrous hollow, he's willing to go to that level to kill another human if need be. Which I think seeing someone spiral to be at their lowest is also sometimes like when it's most interesting to see the choices that they make. Funnily enough, the other thing that came from this is there was a very prominent meme at the time where people would insert Tsukishima into other series on like a pivotal moment where something happened. I know you don't read or watch One Piece, but first chapter of One Piece is that Shanks loses his arm saving Luffy in the sea, and people just like would Photoshop Tsukishima being the one in any pivotal backstory moment of any character. So
Yeah,
that is one of the
okay,
legacies of this arc.
okay,
So
that's fun.
well, Gon has to find his dad, Tsukishima, that sort of thing.
Okay, all right, sure, sure, sure.
There is a stretch of I was going to say there's a stretch between that scene where Tsukishima turns the family against Ichigo, where everyone um, thinks that he's being strange and weird and crazy, Compare that to someone like Orihime. Orihime, who, funnily enough, she's not who this arc is about, but I think she gets a good few solid moments for her character. I think she's kind of in the background, but you do get the sense that in the absence of Ichigo being the hero, she is taking it upon herself to be more proactive in what she can do with her abilities. I mean, there's showcases of how she's able to face off against Ginjo in a particular moment. She has, I think, she demonstrates she has much more conviction in her like resolve when confronted with someone like Rukia, who plays in her face a little bit. And there's a nice scene where she's like sticks up for herself and for Ichigo, and she's like, "No, like I don't agree with you." Um, and then tie that to scenes later in this arc where Orihime has been manipulated to think that Tsukishima is her brother, and she is being turned against Ichigo in that way. But because her feelings are so strong for Ichigo, she's one of the people who's she knows that something is wrong in her
Yeah,
brain,
yeah.
that this
I noticed
doesn't
that
make sense.
immediately. Yeah. She was one of the
Um,
only ones that had that kind of dissonance.
yeah, it's like she being made to take these actions against him, but she's got tears in her eyes as she's doing it. She's trying to resist her body and her mind. Yeah, so she's not pivotal. She's not one of the major characters of the arc, but I do think she gets some
Yeah, I
pretty
agree.
like some pretty good scenes.
She has some good scenes in this arc. Absolutely. She's always herself.
Yeah,
There's never any like her character is always in character, if you know what I mean.
let's talk about, you touched on it, chapter 458. Uh, this is, if the twist of Cousin Shu being home is the first twist of the series, I think this is, or the twist in the arc, this is the second one. This is the big reveal that happens, which kind of retroactively flips everything on its head. Until this point, we had known that kind of what kicked this off was Uryu being attacked. He was hospitalized for most of this arc. As we knew, though, at the time, he was attacked physically. He was actually injured. There was an assumption that Tsukishima had done that to him, but it was kind of unexplained. He was absent for so much of when answers were coming. Um, you have this moment where Ichigo and Ginjo are together trying to face off, in this moment where they're surrounded by everyone, and Ginjo is the last one to get cut by Tsukishima. And in that moment, Ginjo hasn't really changed. Ichigo's confused. And the big revelation when Uryu steps on the scene is, "What are you doing, Ichigo? Ginjo, the man behind you, he's the one who attacked me." That's one of the iconic pages, I think, of this arc. A big moment that like flips everything of what you thought was being presented. It then ties into this fact that Ginjo is in fact the main villain. He told Tsukishima to cut everyone in the execution group so that they would think of Tsukishima as their enemy. So he did insert himself in that way for them, different to how he's inserted himself positively for everyone else. And then in cutting them again, that is when it returns back to normal.
Right.
So there were allusions of there were moments where this was being alluded to, where there's this there's this funny line that Ginjo says where, and I think you get the sense from him the whole arc, you're like, there's something off about Ginjo. Like as you're reading it, you're like, you're the villain, aren't you? Like you're a creepy, weird guy in some ways. I don't trust you 100%. Even though up until that point, you don't really have a reason. He's not doing anything of evidence of that. When he's alongside Ichigo, he even says that where he's like, "Oh, I would make a terrible villain." Which it gets brought up again where he's like, yeah, you had Tsukishima had to cut me. I wouldn't have been able to lie convincingly
Mm.
that I was doing this. I had to like genuinely think that Tsukishima was my enemy to pull off this big moment, which as it turns out, they were stringing Ichigo along so he could get his Fullbring powers so that then they could absorb it and Ginjo could take his substitute Shinigami ability back, rather than Ichigo get it for himself. So uh, even more than Ichigo thought before, he was being used from the very start by everyone. He was a little pawn in this whole game.
He was.
Yeah, I love this moment. So curious of what you felt of when that happened.
Well, as I said, I think 458 is my favorite chapter in the arc, and
Mm.
maybe my favorite chapter in the series so far, actually. And I did always, but I wasn't surprised. The details maybe I didn't pick, but I kind of like knew all along. It's Tsukishima is not the big bad here. It's Ginjo is the big bad. There's a question of, was Kubo playing fair in that revelation that once Tsukishima cuts you a second time, I mean, did he do enough to suggest that possibility, or was that a bit of a deus machina? That's like, would we have any way of known that that was possible? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether people complained about that when that was revealed. It's like, how could we possibly have known that? But it was an interesting revelation in that it, as you said, it flipped things completely on their head. And I just love that. What I love about that chapter is that once this comes out, it's like everything starts. The arc is relatively low key, and then all of a sudden when that revelation happens in 458, it's like that whole chapter is just like absolutely just like frantic mentally, and just it's like on edge, and it's like, oh my god, this shit's hitting the fan. And it's just like 50 chapters worth of drama in one chapter, and emotional trauma and all the other stuff, which I really liked. I also, though, kind of think with Ginjo that I think there almost is like a triple flex here. There's like, he's the good guy, no, he's the bad guy, no, he's the good guy, oh, he's the bad guy. I'm not convinced, even now that the arc is over and I've read it, I'm still not really sure he's the bad guy here.
Ginjo's kind of tragic.
He is, like I said, he's tragic in the same way that Coyote is tragic, but I also think he might not necessarily be wrong. And I think I haven't given up on the idea that the Soul Society are actually kind of the bad guys in some way. It's like, I don't want to do a direct comparison with the Hunter Association, but the Hunter Association as a group, they're not nice people. They're necessary, but they're pretty nasty and sneaky and ruthless. And I guess I would challenge anyone to put themselves in Ginjo's position and to think and act any differently than he did. I guess that's the question I would pose is, there but for the grace of God, until you've walked a mile in my shoes, any metaphor, any cliche you like, would you react any differently? Would you have lived your life any differently in his position than he did? Would Ichigo? That might be the most relevant question. If Ichigo had gone the Ginjo route instead of the Ichigo route, would he have ended up any differently? And I'm not sure that the answer is yes. I think it's very easy to relate to the choices Ginjo makes. And I think the reason is that they're not unreasonable by any reasonable standard. That's how I look at him anyway.
Yeah, that's what I think is most fascinating about his character. He's a character where the more I think about him, the more I do appreciate what Kubo was doing here. He is the inverse of Ichigo. As we do learn, he was the first substitute Shinigami. This was alluded to before by Ukitake as well, who gave Ichigo the badge at the end of Soul Society. That there were systems in place for this to be, so thereby he wasn't the first one. Ginjo presents his case. He was being monitored. He didn't feel like he trusted Soul Society and what they were doing. He felt very different about Ukitake, who, when you compare it to Ichigo, that's Rukia's captain. That's someone who has more ties in a positive way, how Ichigo perceives him. I think we don't really get the sense of what Ichigo thinks of Soul Society as a collective, as a group. He very much kind of treats the people that he sees within it for who they are. So in Ginjo presenting that to him, Ichigo makes a choice that he doesn't feel the same way. But I agree with you. I think the reason why
he does, absolutely. I don't know if it's the right choice, though. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's why it's successfully pulled off, because you understand why both of them would feel the way that they do. Ichigo, Ichigo, who feels like being a substitute shinigami is maybe the most important thing in his life, of having him, giving him a purpose, whereas Ginjo, who felt like it was a curse, that there was something off about it, and they were in similar circumstances and they just had completely different takes on it. And you can sense, like what you said, you didn't feel like, you know, how many times do you reverse it? Was he good? Was he bad? Ginjo. I think what is quite good about how Tsukishima's power is used here is that all it does is it just inserts Tsukishima into that life that that person thinks of how he fits in there. It doesn't change people's personalities, how they act or think, really, of who they are as people. And I get the sense from Ginjo before he was caught that last time, and also after. I think Ginjo would have. You see when Ginjo was with Ichigo that he did like Ichigo, that he acted in a way where, like, I don't know. I feel like he, if Ichigo did believe him, was on the same opinion, Ginjo would have taken him on board and been like,
I agree with
"Yeah,
that 100%.
we can be in this together. I want us to do
Yep.
this together."
He may have
So
even
yeah,
had
I
that
think
ambition when he started. That might have been one of the possibilities he was hoping could come out of it.
you compare it to other characters, like I mentioned Rukia earlier. Once you see her being cut, she's the one Fullbring again, where once she's returned to her default state of knowing of this scheme that she's a part of, and having fooled Ichigo, realized that she was fooling him, she makes the conscious choice of flipping sides, pretty much. So yeah, it never changes who they are as people. The experiences of what they've done on either side of being cut by Tsukishima remains, I think, true to their true character, I
Mm.
suppose.
Yeah.
And then to on your earlier point as well, I get what you mean about the mechanics of Tsukushima's ability. I would say it's okay in the sense that Ichigo and Ginjo, at least some chapters before that happened, they talked about like we have no idea how to reverse this. So like they were trying to figure out how it can be done. So there was always like a question mark of what is this way. It's a good reveal because it makes sense within everything that is laid out, but also very, very difficult to actually predict, like you said, every single piece that lays out to make it make sense. So yeah, chapter 458, that's a big one. Chapter 459, that is also a big one. I would say that is one of a lot of fans' favorite chapters of the series. That is when Rukia returns. That is the big reveal of um, I suppose Ginjo's plan in the first half, but then also and Ichigo feeling as down he has ever felt in his life. He turns around. Urihara and Ishin are there. Obviously, he has no spiritual pressure. He can't see the third person who's stabbing him. He thinks his dad is stabbing him. You see in that moment that there's like rain pouring down on him along with his tears. Like probably the lowest Ichigo has ever been as a character, where he's violently sobbing and begging and like, please, please, I just want one person in my life who knows the truth of what's happening. And then it turns out, just as she did in chapter one, that Rukia appears and through the works of Urahara is returning his powers in a similar way to how it happened before. I think that is like, this was the moment in the arc where people were like, okay, check back in. Uh, which is a shame because I think there are great things that do happen leading up to this. But I do
So
totally
it was
understand that this
like
is.
Crollo and Hisoka in the Heaven's Arena, is what you're saying.
It's like, oh yeah, paid attention. I'm paying attention now
Yeah, yeah.
to what's happening. Which I get. This is such a gratifying moment for Ichigo and what he's gone through this arc, but also just as a reader to see these familiar faces returning again. You're not like a typical fan in that sense, where like Bleach is the Shinigami cast, like you need to see them at all times to be bought into what's happening.
No, no, I don't feel that way. I mean, I like
Okay,
some of those characters a lot, but I don't feel that they have to be center stage in order for it to be Bleach. No, it's Ichigo's story. I will say, I feel like when the Shinigami made their surprise appearance in 459, and it's like, okay, I feel like at that point it was like, well, we know how this is going to end now. I think that's kind of took all the drama out of it because it's like, well, obviously Ginjo, the Fullbring, they're not a match for the Shinigami captains. I mean, to me that was my instant reaction is we know how this is going to end. This is a men against boys fight here, or women against girls, if you will, if there's some of those too. So I kind of felt like, yes, it was a big fan servicey moment, but
Hmm.
I kind of felt like it leached some of the suspense and some of the drama out of the story because it's just like, all right, well, this is a done deal now. They're too strong. We know how this is going to end. At least that's how it struck me.
No, I get that. I understand that, especially where Kubo clearly had to write it in such a way where it was okay. The Shinigami could come in at any point and save the day. Why don't they?
Yes.
And his way of working around that is if Ichigo is so absent from that world anymore, then they should, in theory, no longer be involved in his life and everything that's happening. So yeah, I do agree with that point. But then you got the other side of the people who are like, I just want to see these characters come back and be cool.
Yeah.
And like you say, they are. I agree. As soon as they come, everyone comes back. It's like, okay, this is a chance for these characters to showcase how they've improved time skip, like post time skip. These feel like the weakest villains of the series thus far. To be fair, all the fights are pretty short. I would say they're
Yeah.
quite concise in what they're doing. I think the Byaki Tsukishima one is quite good for Byaki's character as well, where you can see the journey he's going on of accepting Rukia as his family, and I suppose his like and and having Tsukishima entered into his brain, his memory of the past. Tsukishima trying to weaponize that in the moment. Byakuya still killing Tsukishima anyway because he thought it just still didn't feel right to him. Like his conviction said something else. So even when trying to be emotionally manipulated, if something isn't like the capital T truth to Byakuya, he was the one for who could be unaffected by manipulation of memories in that way. Yeah, and then it builds up to this fight with Ichigo and Ginjo, which I agree doesn't ever feel like Ginjo has a shot. But I think, and how Ichigo has to actually kill Ginjo in the end as well. I think it serves as a good resolution for Ichigo's character in this arc. It's the first character he's ever killed in the series as well. Beyond, well, actually, even if you include Hollows, he's technically cleansing them, moving them through the spirit world in that way. But to be the first human being, he then takes it upon himself to make sure he's buried properly when him and like Soul Society get back together in that way. Yeah, I think it's a good send off and kind of is a good endpoint for Ginjo's like tragic fate that he decided this was the journey he was going to take and what it meant to be a substitute Shinigami. I was going to say in classic Kubo fashion, we get I think one page of flashback where he first met Tsukishima as a little boy. We
Mm.
see Ginjo as a substitute Shinigami. He didn't feel the need to say anything more. That was clearly there's enough unsaid where you figure out okay, clearly Tsukishima idolized Ginjo, and like so many other people in the Fullbring group, they were just willing to go along with him for this vision that he had, and it's again tragic that he made all these plans to do everything only to be confronted by the reality of just how strong the system is, and that he wouldn't be able to turn against them, even if he, even with all the effort he did put into trying to make that plan.
Yeah, it's just kind of ironic that this is the first human being that Strawberry is kills because it's like part of me this whole time is thinking, he's not very different from you really, and he's not your enemy in many ways, and circumstances maybe made him your enemy, but it's yeah. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, once we learn that the whole substitute Shinigami thing is a sham in the first place, basically, and it's only because of circumstances that it works out differently with Ichigo. But I mean, the Soul Society. These are not nice people. I mean, these, this is not this is not a good versus evil scenario in this arc by any stretch of the imagination, which I think is good. That's a positive. I like that. And yeah, and Ginjo, he was a victim of circumstance. He really was. He was set up like a bowling pin, as the Grateful Dead would say. And he kind of was in a choice where you say he made all these grand plans and did all this, and it's all true. But I also feel like this was a life that did not have that many choices in it. I feel like he had a lot of things were decided for him, and there was really kind of only one path he could follow, and he was following it.
Would you say that of all the arcs so far, that Ginjo is your favorite villain of the series, even compared to someone like Aizen?
Well, I mean, Aizen is, he's the Shishio of Bleach in a way. He's the stature. He's the villain with stature. But Ginjo is certainly more, to me, more morally ambiguous than Aizen is. So I would say, rather than better or worse, I would say different.
And that's funny that you mentioned Shishio, because I get, in having read the Kyoto arc now, after being familiar with this arc, I see Shishio in Ginjo, like the art, like the
I get where
design
you're
of
going with that. Yeah, I get where you're going with that.
predecessor, successor, different
Yeah,
relationship with that
yeah,
title.
yeah,
One goes down the dark route,
yeah.
one
No,
uses it in a different way. So yeah,
but
that was a
the
funny thing
difference
I
the
noticed.
difference is that Shishio is a sociopath and Ginjo is not a sociopath, so which I think is a very important difference. And
No,
I
yeah,
think Aizen is a sociopath too. So I think that's why that struck me. But you're right. It's like he is the photo negative version of Kenshin in the same way that Ginjo is the photo negative version of Ichigo. Except I think the difference between Shishio and Kenshin is more stark than the difference between Ichigo and Ginjo.
yeah. I think intentionally Kubo made there be much more crossover in Ichigo and Ginjo, as part of that relationship that they had, than making it a pure contrast. So yeah, that was just a fun observation that I wanted to note as well. I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to say, or should we jump over to recommendations and
Yeah,
then
let's do it. Let's do it. I'm
final
good.
scores? Cool. I'll kick off then, and I'm going to use a series that this will be the third time we've shouted out this one. I did it for the very first arc. I said the first arc of Bleach was similar to the first arc of this. You did it last time with Arrancar, and that is yet again Yu Yu Hakusho by Yoshihiro Togashi. I think specifically the Chapter Black arc within Yu Yu Hakusho, there's a lot of similarities here, which makes me feel like that was a direct influence for Kubo. Um, there's a time where the protagonists have losing their powers, or there's a distance between them, and they're involved with a predecessor who turns into a villain. So, Inspired Detective for Yu Hakusho and Substitute Shinigami for Bleach. I think it's a darker, more psychological shift in terms of tone for the series. Uh, and there are kind of similar motives. Like, there's different things on a character level for sure, but I can see a lot of crossover and the structure and the contrast of Ichigo and Ginjo, and what you saw as well in the Chapter Black arc of Yu Yu Hakusho. Um, so yeah, it's an obvious choice at this point, but I think it's just worth repeating that I feel like I see so much of that series in Bleach.
Okay, now that I think about it, it didn't occur to me at the time, but after our conversation, I could probably have picked Kyoto Arc actually here, but
Mm.
I went with Soul Eater by Atsushi Ohkubo. And it's funny because I mean, when we did our Gachiakuta show, I think one of us picked Soul Eater and one of us picked Bleach as the two series to recommend. And I
You're
think
connecting this family line.
in many ways we kind of felt like Gachiakuta was like the love child of those two series. And I feel like I've been dancing around recommending Soul Eater for all of the Bleach shows we've done, and I think that it really is time to because there just is something. There's something in Soul Eater that really overlaps Bleach to me. The same sort of sense of the same attitude. There's an attitude to both series that I find very, very similar. And even though there are a lot of differences in stylistically, I think that there's something tonally and in attitude that I just feel like, particularly in this arc, it kind of goes into Soul Eater. If Soul Eater was a music genre, it would be jazz. It has a very kind of a jazzy feel to it, and like not even like bebop like Charlie Parker, but like Miles Davis later period, like a little bit dissonant jazz. And I feel like that there's something of that in this. There's something. This is the jazziest arc of Bleach. It's a little quieter. It's a little more, has a little more of that sense of kind of going in different directions, and even though it's not improvised, it's not gardening, it has more of a kind of an unexpected twist and turns thing to it. So if I was going, I think I could have recommended Soul Eater for any of the Bleach arcs we've done in any of those episodes, but I do think that the Fullbring arc, oh excuse me, the whatever they call it arc, the the Lost Agent arc is, it maybe is the most apt comparison to make Soul Eater my recommendation. So that's what I'm going with.
And you'll be glad to hear then that indeed in the anime there was quite a few jazz-inspired sort of vibey
Oh, really?
on
Well,
the soundtrack for that.
As
Like
as
scenes,
usual.
like scenes when they're at execution. You know, earlier in the arc when they're in those dark rooms, that sort of vibe.
Wow, I had no
Um,
idea. Honestly, had no idea. Seriously, so that makes me feel kind of cool. That's the right choice, in my opinion.
yeah. Well, there you go. Okay, let's do like our final wrap up of our feelings on this arc and our ratings. Enzo, why don't you take away this time? I was curious on your perspective of this arc as someone who had found things, had a different perspective from, I would say, the average Bleach fan. So, in me knowing that how this charts and the average Bleach fans' expectations, yeah, I was
Yeah.
really keen to see how how it would
Hmm.
sit with you.
Like I said, I find it to be not as epic as arcs that preceded it, but I like that it's more human, more personal. I like that it's shorter, and I don't mean that in a snarky way. I honestly do like that it's shorter. I think Arrancar was too long. I think it tells a good full story in a sane amount of time. It doesn't need more time than it takes, and it doesn't need less. It takes the right amount of time. Um, there are elements of it that work better for me than others, and I do feel like once the Shinigami arrived, that kind of like that was like taking the souffle out of the oven for me. And after that, it was just kind of like, all right, we know how it's going to end. Let's just get there. So I'm going to give it a 79 because which is pretty closely aligned with my rankings of the first three arcs. I would say I like it better than the first arc, which name I've forgotten now. What's the name of the first arc? Shinigami arc?
Agent of the Shinigami. Yeah.
Agent of the Shinigami, yeah. Um, but even though it's totally different and it doesn't have the same scope and it doesn't have the same, grandness that Arrancar or Soul Society have, there are elements of it that I think actually are more resonant with me. So I'm going to be, like I said, I'm kind of in the same ballpark score wise, and I don't remember what all my individual scores are, but I think I'm pretty close to where I was with the last two arcs and giving it a 79.
Yeah, you are. You're around similar range. I remember last time you said as well that you gave Arrancar the same or similar score, but that was also kind of a case of it had the highest highs of the series, but also the lowest lows.
Yes, I agree. Not the
So
case here,
different.
I wouldn't say. This was more consistent.
Okay, fair. Okay. For me, I would give it a 91. So that
Oh, I was
puts
going to
it.
guess 92. Okay.
So yeah, it puts it like second lowest, just above the very first arc. I have respect for Kubo's vision, his conviction for telling this sort of story. I think it was a bold choice that, in many ways, ultimately didn't work out. But in distance from it, I only appreciate it more. I think Ginjo is a strong villain. I think the architecture, how he laid it out, was very impressive. But I do also think that he could have done maybe a better job in the first half of the arc of convincing people who were a bit like, huh, of where this was potentially going. Yeah, I think that is that's where I lie with that. And as someone who, again, I'm a massive Bleach fan, I love all the characters, the Soul Society, everything like that. There are highs and lows to this one, but again, because it is quite focused, I think there is maybe an upper ceiling of where I can rate it.
Probably fair.
So there we go. We've finally covered the Fullbring, aka Lost Agent arc. Thank you, Enzo, for reading.
You're
we only
welcome.
have one
Thank you.
more left. One more. It's not as long as Arrancar, but I would say
the 100 Years War is not as long as Arrancar.
I would say, in contrast to this arc, 1,000 Year Blood War is the most ambitious arc of the series as well.
All right, well, looking forward to it.
Stay tuned. Eventually, we will cover that at some point. And yeah, we have the anime of that coming out as well to wrap up the full adaptation of Bleach. So, very exciting time to be a Bleach fan. Much to look forward to. Thank you, Enzo. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Just like last time, I'm going to say, stay bleachy.
Yeah. Bye-bye.